Okay, today's video has been in the works for a very long time, which is simultaneously both positive and negative. On the positive side, the game is obviously good enough for me to have spent over 600 hours playing it. Considering it's a baseline free-to-play title, that's a pretty incredible return on its price tag. And I met some pretty awesome people along the way, but on the flip side, after 600 hours experiencing the entire gameplay content loop, I'm now intimately familiar with all of its problems, and some of them are pretty intense. All in all, since the early access period initially began until now, Throne and Liberty has become a central part of my gaming life, and now finally, I feel pretty much capable of talking about it. I'll start with a broad strokes overview. Throne and Liberty is a free-to-play, tab-targeting MMORPG developed by NetEase and published by Amazon Game Studios. Originally released in Korea, which people refer to as KR in this case, Throne is a hybrid experience that contains heavy emphasis on PvP with an extreme focus on social guilds. One of the earliest and most important questions that people will probably have about a free-to-play MMORPG is, can I play it solo? And the answer for Throne and Liberty is a resounding kind of. You can certainly play the game by yourself, but unless you join a well-coordinated guild of at least 40 plus players, you'll find it essentially impossible to participate in a large portion of the content, let alone some of the most rewarding activities and battles. I'll go over what all of this content is, obviously, but if you want to play Throne and Liberty beyond the most basic rudimentary experience, you must join a coordinated group of people, and what quickly becomes readily apparent afterward is that this coordinated group must then coordinate with others. The resulting experience is an extremely social one. Leaderboards affect critical game mechanics, but leaderboards will be dominated by players who have a large group supporting them, or players who abuse exploits in particular, which means less and less relevance for solo players, and a heavy emphasis on who you know or who you ally with. On the one hand, knowing what it really is, that social aspect can be kind of amazing. However, with so much of the game built around large-scale groups, and so much of the content incentivizing massive alliances, it's a bit of a coin flip on where you land, with a very stratified effect taking place that sees a lot of players getting closed out, sort of things they'd rather participate in, simply because they're not part of the server-leading alliance, whatever server that happens to be. Me personally, I kind of lucked out. At the end of the video, I'll go over my personal journey, start to finish, what I ended up doing and how it went. But not everyone will have a similar experience, and the real point this intends to communicate is that if you want to play Throne and Liberty, getting the most out of the game as you do, you have to be prepared for the macro social experience, because keeping to yourself and playing solo doesn't even really scratch the surface, which is rather unfortunate in my view. Still, if it ends up being a proper fit, the game really does have a tremendous amount to offer. So let's get into the actual review, starting with basic progression. As I said earlier, Throne and Liberty is a basic tab-targeting MMORPG with a pretty rudimentary loot curve. Green, blue, or purple weapons and armor, which can be upgraded from level 0 to level 9 until they release further upgrade levels in the near future, up to 12 eventually, with skills that can also be upgraded through that same rarity curve from green to blue to purple. Upon creating a character, you'll choose two main weapon archetypes, and the synergy between those two distinctly different weapons will dictate your overall build. There's obviously some combinations that are better than others, for the purpose of being a tank, a healer, or a basic damage dealer. But to be completely honest here, the developers have done a pretty decent job balancing things, so that no single build becomes completely dominant. And even fringe combinations or off-meta builds are still, generally speaking at least, pretty viable. As evidence of this, and one of the reasons why it took me 600 hours to finally make a review, I deliberately ran crossbow and staff, which is not a combination of weapons that's typically used, because I saw incredible synergy between them with stacking burn, the weaken burn effect, and over the course of my playtime at various different times, I achieved top 100 in overall activity ranking, I'll go over what that is later on, top 200 in kills, top 200 in global 3v3 arena, as well as rank 1 or rank 2 in various boss challenges. The build worked, quite well actually, despite not being considered meta in any sense of the word. However, despite the fact that the developers have done a relatively good job balancing things, for the most part, the community is where the problems are. I have never before, in my entire history with video games, seen a community more pig-headed and meta-focused than Throne and Liberty. To such an extreme, you wonder how they even use a toilet without their favorite YouTuber giving them a step-by-step guide on where to sit and how to squeeze. If you're not using a certain select few weapon combinations, you will be looked at like you have 7 heads. And even further, if you play the organized arena at least, which is perhaps why I'm so jaded about this, you'll get actively flamed not infrequently, before the matches even begin, by people who simply cannot think for themselves or comprehend why you don't have one of the 7 or so main weapon combinations. No joke, before matches would even start, I was routinely subjected to whispers and private messages like, "What the fuck are you running? Those don't go together, fake build," only to then win the actual match, typically having the highest damage on the team, and hear a multitude of excuses about how, well, they're only targeting me, not you, so it doesn't matter. Even worse, because Arena probably isn't something that most players will ever engage with, if you're trying to run dungeons through the community board at lower power levels, which is thankfully kind of a deprecated system now that there's better random matchmaking incentives, but if you tried to run dungeons through the community board early on, which is a pretty normal system, right, for just finding a group and doing some of the core content, you would often get flatly and universally denied, just because you didn't have one of the main weapon sets that everyone narrow-mindedly focuses on. Never mind the fact that you could be superior to these people in every single qualifying metric, because they just don't understand how that's possible. Their 2 separate brain cells, as fast as they rub them together, don't generate enough friction for an independent thought, so you suck, get a real build. The biggest problem, by far, with Throne and Liberty is the player base, but I'll circle back to that in a bit. After jumping in and picking your initial set of weapons, which is by no means final, by the way, you certainly can switch later down the line, though it is a pretty big resource drain and you probably shouldn't switch around very often. After getting started, you basically fly through the leveling process in a matter of hours. This game is basically the opposite when compared to something like vanilla World of Warcraft. Leveling is just a sidebar. It's a means to an end, and it goes by incredibly fast because the real game is incremental power scaling after reaching level 50. You can do the Codex quests for marginal rewards or be a completionist and explore every region fully, but none of it really matters because once you get to max level and start doing the real content, you're going to wish you didn't waste the time or the tokens as you got there. See, progression in this game is completely time-gated, unless you pay money. After reaching level 50, you'll rely on a variety of currencies and tokens to complete various pieces of content, and if you don't have any, you literally just have to wait before doing more of these rewarding activities. Right now, for the time being, they'll be adding more over time. Right now, there's Abyssal Contract tokens, Dimensional Contract tokens, and regular allied contracts themselves. That's kind of the trifecta you'll be using. Once you reach level 50, you basically end up with a very consistent loop of activities. Every day, you receive 900 Dimensional Contract tokens, which lets you receive rewards from 3 different level 50 dungeons. You get 10 regular contracts to complete in one of the high-level open-world zones, which give various rewards that you'll want for leveling up gear and weapons. And then by completing those activities, you'll be awarded Abyssal Contract tokens, which let you participate in the open world dungeons, consuming them as you kill monsters to get drops and rewards. There's more, like different types of contracts or mystic keys, of which you get 5 per day, and they open little nodes scattered across the map, sometimes spawning portals with good rewards. But I'm not going to bore everyone with some detailed explanation on all of this stuff, because it really comes secondary to whether or not you enjoy the overall combat and the larger encounters. In essence, every day you'll get a couple hours worth of busy work content to do, maybe more, just depending on your speed, but then every week you'll get some extra stuff. There really is a lot of different things available. Some of them are definitely more worthwhile than others by a lot. You can fight the Gate of Infinity challenge bosses and try to get a fast time, which gives good rewards. But that's a little bit skewed because it's all about how fast you kill the thing, which makes it a little bit more difficult for tanks and healers. You can fish, which has the potential to give very valuable drops, which are sellable. You can send your little Amatoys on expeditions and get rewards there, or combine them and get different bonuses. You can fight world bosses when they're available, which is governed by a central server schedule. You can do contracts here or there, or even wait until nighttime and PvP in certain open world zones, but for the sake of simplicity, after playing the game for a couple of days, you'll probably settle into a little routine of sorts, where you log in, complete 10 contracts, complete 3 dungeons, maybe do some open world grinding, and a couple bosses here and there, whatever happens to be available during your time online. It's really not bad in terms of reliability, and you can also go like 5 or 6 days without logging in and come back to a bunch of accumulated resources that you can then burn through all at once. Because they stack, you don't lose them right away. But after a certain point, you will reach a maximum cap of progression currency, and you'll start losing the daily amounts. It's a giant system to maximize player engagement. It's all there to make you log in every single day and feel like there's always something to do when you wake up in the morning, but after a while, it starts feeling kinda hollow, which is where the real endgame content comes into play. Having taken so long to publish this review, none of you watching will have to deal with this the same way we did, but Throne and Liberty uses what's called a milestone system, which I have to say is pretty damn cool. Rather than allow the entire player base to just speedrun every single shred of content all at once, the game has these time-gated milestones, as they call them, unfolding in the background on a central clock, which open up more and more bosses or new floors inside dungeons, or even the pinnacle encounters arc bosses after various time delays. At first, there wasn't a whole lot to do, during launch week, I mean, but now, having progressively unlocked more and more activities, encounters, and locations through the milestone system, there's tons of things on the server schedule, and it genuinely feels like a living, breathing world. Every 2 hours, you get 30 minutes of nighttime, which means PvP in select open world dungeon areas, or you can go harvest certain ingredients that only appear at night in certain areas and zones, and level your cooking with them. Likewise with rain, which is a lot more sporadic and shorter, you can get certain drops from certain monsters, which you otherwise couldn't, and they let you craft rare and valuable foods. Another cool thing, though frustrating at times for a lot of people, is that one of the open world dungeons entirely can only be accessed while it's raining, because rain fills the fountains and opens the big central doors. It's actually incredible to have this kind of living world where there's always something different to do, but sadly, after you figure out what those opportunities are, especially the optimal ones, and take advantage of them a few times as they arrive, you start settling into a much more monotonous routine. Log in, do your daily quests, if it rains do X, if it's nighttime do Y, selectively choose and participate in the bosses that are available, and tag whatever events you feel like. Again, high praise to the developers for making a system that has such flexibility and depth compared to other MMORPGs, but when you're involved with a larger group, especially one with rigid requirements, which is a distinct possibility if you want to be competing for the most valuable objectives, you end up falling into a much more stagnant routine. Shifting gears to PvP, there's quite a few times and places to do it, but two of the key things an organized group will be competing for are boon stones and rift stones. These are actually awesome little objectives, but they do require a somewhat large and coordinated group, likely because they have tremendous value, and they tend to happen at tricky times of day, depending on your time zone. Boon stones are basically capturable points that give a global bonus to the guild that has them. You fight for them at specific times on certain days, and it's basically a guild versus guild event with up to 70 different people on either side, where the winner gets the stone. It's actually fun, genuinely it is, but again, it speaks to the necessity of having a large and coordinated group of players, because a team of 6 friends who don't want to be part of a larger alliance probably can't ever compete for one of these, ever, and some of them are really great to have. Similar to boon stones are rift stones, but these are even better because a rift stone gives the guild controlling it access to a private world boss every single day. This means that the occupying guild can farm their own private drops from this world boss once per day for as long as they control it, which is a hugely beneficial thing to have. It's also lucrative, by the way, and it can be used to target gear farm for certain players. My guild had the Chernobog Riftstone for a while, then the Excavator Riftstone, because they were trying to get certain helmets and then wands to gear a bunch of their favorite players. And the general system for boonstones and riftstones, in my view, is one of the coolest pieces of content in the entire game. If you have a group of players who are online 24/7, you can go after a bunch of these things. And since declaring your intent to capture one is largely based off activity ranking, which is just a general measurement of how much you play the game, the system is tilted heavily towards the larger, more active guilds, which, again, is great if you're in one, but it sucks for anyone who wants to play by themselves. Speaking even further to the incredible value of having a guild, there's also guild bosses once per week, which allow you to repeatedly kill up to 7 times, based on guild level, any of the world bosses in the entire game, with drops exclusively for your own guild members. It's a fantastic thing to farm these when the time comes, and it can really bring a group of people together to go in and fight and come out with a bunch of different things that they want, offering a type of density and volume that you just don't get anywhere else in the entire game. To me, guild bosses are a great system that should be expanded, if anything, because they offer the precise type of content that makes the game feel better and more rewarding while incentivizing group play in a purely only positive format. World bosses in general, aside from the more private versions of them through riftstones or guild boss fights, are divided up into 2 different categories, peace and conflict, where peace bosses are accessible to everyone, which is great, and conflict bosses are massive Zerg PvP fiestas where basically only the server-dominant alliance, which is just a collection of individual guilds working together, have any shot at doing them, and everything lags a lot. Lastly, in terms of general group content in the open world, Arc bosses, which have by far the most valuable drops easily, have peace and conflict versions as well, which are incredibly crowded, laggy, and often crash people's games. Once again, heavily rewarding the large groups and being less than enjoyable for players by themselves. They do have unique mechanics, it's an impressive fight overall, but I can't help but feel like the experience will actually improve as the player population shrinks a little bit or thins out. And the fights go from a lag fest where you can't even render the player models 10 feet in front of your face to something a little bit more contained. However, for all the good, there's also bad, and it wouldn't be a fair review if I didn't talk about it. This game is openly, blatantly, and wildly pay to win. On the surface, it's not so bad, and there are ways to overcome it. There are. But when you really dig down into how the gear progression works, it gets pretty obvious. Gear can be leveled from 0 to 9, as I said earlier, but gear also comes with 3 different trait slots, and therein lies the problem. Deceptively, purple gear is not actually better than blue gear, at least not for a long time, because traits are one of the most powerful ways to sculpt your character. The thing about traits, though, is that you need to have duplicate items, or a thing called trait unlock stones, in order to get new ones, which is where it all goes pear-shaped, because the game's premium currency, called Lucent, lets you buy as many traits and level them up as you want through the auction house. This leads to a pretty obvious scenario where you can absolutely throw money at the game and get stronger. Players call it swiping in this context, but thankfully there does exist an option to earn Lucent for free, and it's actually a pretty extensive system. I don't want to turn the whole video into a how to make money type guide, but you can do things like extract traits from the gear that you get as drops and sell those traits on the auction house for yourself. You can craft certain types of food and sell those as well. Some of them are quite valuable. Or maybe even upgrade components and fully completed items if you get really lucky, which lets you build up a stockpile of Lucent without ever paying real cash. Total transparency, I have spent money on this game, more than I should, but I've also earned somewhere between $800-ish and $1,000 worth of Lucent completely free. One item I luckily received from a world boss netted me over 8,000 Lucent by itself, which is like over $100 easily for one item. And it's a really satisfying feeling to amass thousands and thousands of Lucent for free instead of swiping for it. To be clear, I did pay in this game, but the potential to earn your way as a free-to-play option is absolutely present and should be emphasized. Just one problem. That option was far more viable in the early stages of the game's release, because NetEase had disabled a couple of key gameplay mechanics, things like blue lithographs as one, but not that you're expected to know what that is. NetEase had disabled a couple of key mechanics, which prevented bot programs from making very much money. In the first few weeks, there really weren't any bots at all, because they weren't profitable, which is great, and the economy was thriving as a result. But now they have confusingly reversed all of those changes, and the game is completely overrun. The economy, generally speaking, has crashed to a pale shadow of what it once was, and some of that is just a byproduct of time and people just amassing more gear as they play for more hours. But the heart of the issue is that there are now thousands and thousands of bot accounts running around farming resources, and that downward pressure on the overall economy is a painful thing to witness. Where I was able to make tens of thousands of Lucent from everyday dungeon and world drops, new players who come into the game here and now do not have that same earning potential. Luckily, the prices are down across the board, so it's also less expensive to buy the things you want. But that sort of golden opportunity where you earn huge amounts of money before the economy crashes and then leverage a lot of it into buying what you want after the prices come down doesn't really exist anymore. Think of it like selling everything before the COVID crash and then buying all the resources up while it's crashing, right? This kind of thing, this kind of like up-down style economy playing, it's not really happening anymore. On the one hand, it's very cool to have the option of earning premium currency without spending money, but on the other, this is a pay-to-win video game, no matter how you slice it. And that should be known by players before they invest their time or their money. It's a pretty classic free-to-play monetization model in the contemporary landscape, to be fair, but it's also worth accurately discussing, so people know what they're getting into before they jump. Aside from being pay-to-win, there's a host of smaller issues, so I'll go rapid-fire through those, and you can get a feel for what kind of experience it'll be. Desync is an actual problem. Your character will rubber band all over the place at times, with a particular issue where if you run off the edge of a cliff or a wall, you can sometimes get stuck in this up and down teleporting desync loop for like 20 straight seconds. It's absolute garbage when it happens, frustrating as all hell, and it happens a lot, and they really need to fix it. The grapple system, where you like shoot a point and grapple up, right, to a ledge, is trash. It doesn't respond properly when you use it. Sometimes it overshoots or undershoots or just doesn't work. And it feels like a clunky, amateur, unwanted mechanic that is purely annoying, never satisfying. What's worse is that in one of the arena maps, you must grapple to get in, or in the other, you can get knocked off the edges, and you have to grapple to get back up to the main area, which is a decision that never should have been made, ever, and a design aspect that decidedly should not exist. Large-scale PvP is a shit show for a bunch of reasons, but one of the most notable is body blocking. Yeah, unit collision is on during PvP, which for a few reasons is understandable, and it's off when it's disabled. Seems fine on paper, or in theory. But when you have a giant zerg of people with a brain-dead shot caller screaming in your ear, get in here, with his little voice cracking like a prepubescent teenager, but you can't move because the body blocking is just preventing you from running as a horde of people mash their keyboards trying to go forward or backward or whatever the case may be. It goes from video game to joke in about 3 seconds flat. I will say the game does surprisingly well with large-scale encounters, considering rendering 600 people is no small task and the infrastructure does its best to do so. But the big PvP stuff is really, really difficult to enjoy without an extremely high-end PC. I'm certainly CPU locked on my rig, at least a bit, but I also have an RX 7900 XT, and the big conflict fights were still a slideshow in terms of my FPS. I could play them, absolutely, in the most rudimentary way, but sometimes it would really start suffering, especially with multiple Discord clients running to make sure I was in the right communication channels, which was required by my guild, and OBS for recording things, so take it for what you will. Playable, certainly, but performance is far from perfect. And I can't even imagine what it's like on console. Those people must be suffering. I can't even picture playing this game on console. As for balancing, large-scale PvP is once again extremely hit or miss. Right now, it's a completely one-dimensional metagame where a singular ability called Flash Wave is the main source of tactical impact. It's this giant AoE damage ability with a heal over time component, and you can fire it off twice in rapid succession with a bow, which makes it incredibly good in large numbers. As it stands, the meta gameplay in a large-scale Zerg is to synchronize as many of these flash waves as possible, with a few other abilities like Tornado or Sleep thrown in as a side splash, which can absolutely have a dramatic impact if used at the right moment in the battle. And if done properly, you can really just delete large sections of the enemy group all at once with these flash waves. It's not uncounterable per se, but it's extremely monotonous. It's certainly not very good balancing, and it gets old fast. Smaller scale with groups of 4 to 6 people running around, that can be incredibly fun. But as soon as you go up into the dozens, you'll be taking massive amounts of damage from enormous AoE abilities like Clockwork, and it really does get old. Now, using that point as a segue, the idea of dicey large-scale combat, it's time to talk about the actual pinnacle of the entire game, which is Castle Siege. This is one of the coolest concepts I've ever seen in an MMORPG, and I want to lead with that because it deserves to be recognized. Castle Siege is precisely what it sounds like. The top guild at a certain point in time gets snapshotted, and then that top guild, as well as their alliance, gets to defend this giant castle called Stoneguard from a horde of attackers in one of the best large-scale events that I've honestly ever seen, for the most part. The process by which the defending team gets chosen is kinda bad, to be completely honest. It's all based on activity ranking, which is a very cheesable metric that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, like at all. And the resulting tactic of shuffling a ton of people around between guilds to maximize the activity score is really kind of sad. But once the teams are set and the snapshot gets taken, 10 guilds are chosen to go in along with their alliances. It's a really cool idea. There's siege golems, each having their own function and abilities. There's multiple ways into the fortress, breaking the walls, opening the gates, sneaking through the sewers, etc. And once the attackers get inside, they can pillage the castle and get premium currency for doing so. See, the castle is the central hub of the entire game and its economy, and it has a flat tax rate that accumulates premium currency in its vault as a result. Well, before the siege begins, there's a tax delivery where the defending players try to ensure the money makes it inside and the attackers try to steal it. But after siege is complete, the winning alliance gets to disperse all the collected tax from the entire server to their members. This is an incredible system, it is, and it serves as a massive incentive to coordinate with a large group and be a part of a stronger alliance, because there's literal money to be made. but it also results in a large-scale PvP encounter that can be extremely rough on your hardware. Overall, it's incredibly fun. I'll talk about my personal experience with it in just a minute here, but it's also the type of thing that leads to constant drama. It prioritizes only the strongest, most fully active guilds on the whole server, and it doesn't happen very often at all, which means that despite being the actual pinnacle of PvP in the whole game, it's not something super accessible, and average players might never even get a chance to participate even once, let alone defend the castle, which is, in my view, the actual most fun activity the game has. Imagine if they made this into a battleground. Some of my best memories in World of Warcraft was early stage Alterac Valley. It was so fun. And this castle siege has the potential to beat those memories, if it wasn't so fucking elitist, man. If you could queue up for even a smaller version of this as a PvP battleground, the game would immediately earn my praise for 100 different reasons. But as it stands, the pinnacle of content for Throne and Liberty isn't actually a thing I can use as a recommendation, because most players will never get to experience it. It's a little bit weird to sit here and talk about how cool something is and yet clarify that this very, very cool thing can't be used as a reason to play the game, and it's actually kind of sad when you really think about it. Still, from character creation and picking your initial weapon set in a world where the bulk of the players around you are incapable of understanding that off-meta compositions are just as good in most circumstances when compared to what the YouTubers told you to run, all the way through a short-lived leveling experience, a predictable endgame grind, and a multitude of bosses and battles to choose from, Throne and Liberty does have a lot to offer. It's a fun game, despite a number of glaring flaws, and I'm happy I spent my time playing. But now, now I'm going to talk about my personal journey, because I do think it has relevance in terms of whether or not I recommend the game to viewers. One thing to make note of before I tell the story of my time in this game, and that is I deliberately chose not to play this game as a content creator. Sure, a few people knew along the way, especially in the group of people I met early on, who were awesome, by the way, but I very specifically chose not to stream. I also haven't seriously streamed a game in a couple of years anyway, but I did heavily consider this one, ultimately deciding not to, because I wanted to experience this game in a much more typical fashion. Early access came, I logged in, and I chose a server called Chernobog, which, tragically, was the streamer server, where all the dipshit content creators had gone. I didn't know this at the time, and I would have very deliberately chosen a different server had I known, but I started, I sank in time, and eventually I joined a guild called Special. Joining this guild was a very deliberate thing. This was a guild that clearly had active players, it was a guild that seemed to have good organization, but it also seemed to be a lot more relaxed than some of the other guilds on that server. Turns out it certainly was, I was correct, and thus began the good old days of my time in Throne and Liberty, which you never quite appreciate enough when they happen because you don't actually realize in the moment just how good you really have it. Special was fantastic. I met really cool people, we were entitled to keep the loot that dropped for us from world bosses, and we even took an objective here and there for ourselves, like a boonstone, which we defended multiple times. If I could go back in time, I would have appreciated what it was so much more than I did back then, because everything changed once we formed an alliance with, go figure, the streamer guild called Tanks and Liberty. I know what people are going to say. You did this to yourself, and yes, I did. I could have left at any time, but I sort of got swept up in things because I genuinely made some friends, and this is where the group was headed. Well, after we formed that alliance with the streamers and a bunch of their fanboys, sadly, the alliance decided to transfer off the server. Now, the kicker is, they did this because they wanted to get away from their own community, and they made up some stupid excuse about how the game is too laggy because of how popular we are, so this was their cover to sneak away from their own fans, right, and find a new server. Right at the end of the transfer window, as per their plan, everybody pulled the trigger, and the good old days were over because Special merged with a fanboy community for a particular streamer, and thus began the bullshit. It started with them just deciding that we could only bring 30 people, not 40, because whatever reason, and very quickly turned sour as they arbitrarily made rules, kicked out our friends, and overall just treated the group of players that I had come to know and respect like second-class citizens. Now, I've gone back and forth on this for a while because there's some very specific people who I was going to call out by name and, frankly, ridicule in this video, but instead of doing that, I'd rather do this. There is one, count 'em, one, literally one single established streamer from that entire alliance that deserves positive recognition in my view. And his name is Solid FPS. Soft-spoken, incredibly skilled at whatever game he plays, also humble, and I've known him since back in the early days of the division. He's worth following, he's worth emulating, and even choosing to play the game completely free, he is decidedly more skilled than his peers, who paid many, many thousands of dollars to get ahead. However, he's also enigmatic because pretty much every other established streamer in the entire alliance, particularly the shot callers, are obnoxious, entitled, egotistical, and deceptive brats. A great example would be how the streamer alliance spent hours complaining about how their enemies were creating a giant mega alliance and it was so unfair. All they allegedly wanted was to have their fair and even battles, but the very first chance they get, they created their own mega alliance, justifying it with hyperbolic exaggerations about how they'd rather die than let the enemy have the castle, because those enemies never said GG to them after losing. And there was too much trash talking in world chat on a PvP game. It's pathetic how this group conducted themselves after preaching about community and the health of the game because they just want to make good content so the game gets more popular. They would go and use like special powers to make peaceful bosses on the server inaccessible for everyone else. Sure, it's part of the game. You have the power. You want to be in control. Fine. But the doublespeak snake-like behavior of the streamers, especially being in such close proximity to it, wasn't just uncomfortable. It was downright sad. I went from having an awesome, free-flowing, and enjoyable experience to witnessing friends of mine just arbitrarily screwed out of the drops that they deserved, and won, by the way, with their dice rolls, as the leadership decided, nah, I'm going to give this valuable item to my friend because I just am. He's sad, and he wants it, so he gets it. Deal with it. Another girl got cheated out of items that she deserved not once, but twice. Nicest girl you can imagine, honestly. Constantly keeping the atmosphere positive and doing things for other people just because it's helpful to them. But instead of treating her fairly under their own written rules, they deprioritized her and literally found ways to manipulate those rules and change things so that their little clique, I guess I'll call it, of streamer fanboys can get everything that they want. To be clear, I don't say this from the position of being screwed over myself. I'm not like bitter about something secret and just not telling you. I wasn't ever screwed over by them. I never rolled on a single item, nor cared to, but watching my friends get deliberately ignored or downright disrespected just because they weren't part of this little streamer fanboy leadership group who was desperate for approval and recognition from a few content creators, it left a very bad taste in my mouth, and it's certainly not the only guild where this kind of stuff happened. I went from having motivation to log in and grind out rewards to being required to log in 5 hours per night, often just to sit somewhere and do nothing, literally nothing, so that this group could just cheese the activity system, funneling the time of like 140 people per night at least into one person getting ahead so that they could have a tiny little advantage in the final siege, which was greatly over-exaggerated in terms of importance, considering how certain respawn invulnerability mechanics played out. Every time something happened and the streamers got more and more scared about their ability to win the actual siege battle, they would increase the requirements, adding more and more and more layers, kicking people for not being hardcore enough, and just destroying the experience, not just for those of us who weren't their mindless slaves, but also the entire server. Combine that with some of the worst strategy and shot calling I've ever seen, and it wasn't just a job, it was the type of job that you don't even want to show up for. And just in case anyone doesn't believe me when I say that the shot calling was bad, here's an example. When fighting for a boonstone, which as we talked about earlier is a point defense battle between two guilds, we spent about 11 straight minutes defending the point, but we didn't have the point. This was a war channel on Discord for communication where only like 6 people were allowed to talk, and not a single one of those 6 people noticed that we didn't actually have the objective. They didn't notice that it said plain as day on the side of the screen, "You don't have this." The symbol on the damn thing wasn't from our guild, and the enemies weren't trying to capture it. They just missed it. All of it. Forgive me for being surprised here, but I didn't think the totality of the leadership structure in the entire supposed best guild or alliance on the server would misidentify such basic fundamental mechanics. Of course, they equivocated constantly and made excuses after the fact and coped about numbers and various different things, but the shot calling in this alliance consisted of either yelling at a group of players to do things they couldn't do because they were all dead, or missing the plot completely with negative tactical awareness, subsequently making unhelpful excuses and doubling down on the same decisions next time and every time. just making it painful to watch and even more painful to participate in. We did ultimately win the siege battle because the streamers all got the leaders together for the entire server, except their chief rivals, whom they were scared of, and pulled some Game of Thrones style bullshit to make this amorphous 8-guild alliance that was losing and gaining members day to day. But the entire experience, start to finish, was miserable. Keep in mind, I'm not a sore loser. I'm not saying all this because I lost and I'm angry about it. We won. I got 30-something million Solent, which is like gold in the game. I got 2,000 or 3,000 Lucent, which is, what, $50 worth? And I even came out of it with this special reward title that you get from victory. That is, if they don't kick me out before the milestone is over, which could easily happen. That is exactly the type of people that they are. However, just because I won, or even if I had lost, that doesn't make it all okay. Listening to these people whine and complain about how Amazon Game Studios doesn't have good enough outreach and support for the streamers because their egos are too fragile to endure losing something that they desperately feel entitled to is sad. You feeling threatened by a smaller alliance of players because you won the siege in KR, so you're certainly going to win it again, doesn't mean that Amazon needs to give you special privileges. Get this, one of them types out some toxic stuff in World Chat. He circumvents the chat filter to make sure his profanity shows up. Calls people, I don't know, short bus type losers or something like that. And he gets a 24-hour suspension. And the entire alliance loses their minds about how unfair everything is, after which they order everyone, yes, they order everyone as if they have that kind of authority, not to type anything in the game chat anymore. I'm toxic sometimes, okay? I am. And I say stuff I really shouldn't in the heat of the moment, all right? A lot of people are guilty of that. But if I were to circumvent the chat filter, say toxic things, and then get a relatively short suspension as a result, bro, just own your behavior. Don't go crying relentlessly about how crazy unfair everything is and messaging Amazon staff while trying to order around like 200 people and make sure they don't talk anymore in a video game. Because you're so disconnected from reality, you've made winning a 2-hour siege in Throne and Liberty your entire personality. Just stop it. I thought I suffered from main character syndrome, but I got nothing on these people. Imagine this. Imagine putting in 5 hours of required time per day for weeks because a bunch of streamers are insecure and think that forcing more hours and being more controlling is the proper way to build loyalty in a video game. And then, when the final event rolls around, let's say, I don't know, you have a family emergency and you can't log in, or for some reason you can't get to your computer. They kicked people minutes before the siege because they weren't online for it. After those people spent weeks of their time listening to orders, logging the hours, and jumping through their pathetic little hoops. We weren't people to these assholes. We were numbers. Numbers that they would pretend had value until their ego-driven hubris ran amok and the insecurity came creeping in, at which point they would start kicking people to the curb because the prospect of losing the siege was just straight up too much for their inflated levels of self-importance to handle. The people we were fighting against, despite being massively outnumbered, didn't have these kinds of requirements. They weren't kicking people out or screwing them over just because the pompous and self-aggrandizing leadership had confidence issues. They certainly talked a lot of trash, as would I in their shoes, but watching the interpersonal drama play out in real time, it has never been more apparent to me how self-centered and narcissistic these streamers and their active participating communities really are. Amazon doesn't owe us anything, us being content creators. The total impact that these streamers have on the game is negligible, unless you're someone like Shroud, who was also in the Alliance, by the way. But Shroud was just along for the ride. Half the deceptive shit happening was likely only happening in the first place because people were so desperate to impress him that they were willing to sacrifice their moral integrity for an easier win. To be fair, it's bound to happen to some extent in any PvP game. This is far from my first trip around the rodeo, but maybe I'm just getting older and I have a lower tolerance for this kind of stuff because witnessing it happen here this time was a really unenjoyable experience. In the end, Throne and Liberty became my gaming focus for like almost 2 straight months. It offers a social experience with a hefty amount of content, and it greatly rewards coordinated guilds while sprinkling in just enough supporting systems to where it can be played and enjoyed by smaller, more casual groups, for the most part. NetEase, sadly, is famous for their ability to ruin games with pay-to-win garbage, and Throne is teetering on the brink of that to begin with. But right now, I think it is worth checking out, and it could very well become a mainstay title for people who happen to mesh well with the experience it offers. For better or for worse, there's a steady stream of content being released for it, regular events, new PvP opportunities, better gear, and more. So it's a game I'll regularly come back to. But most importantly, it's a game I met some really cool people in. You all know who you are, the OG Special crew before we merged up into that god-awful alliance. So I just want to publicly say thank you to everyone from that group for the times we shared. To anyone out there on the fence about whether or not to try it, I'd say it's definitely worth a shot, but you got to be open to meeting new people. You have to accept the game for what it is, a sum total of its parts, some of which are far from pretty. And you also need to remember that this is a NetEase game published by Amazon Game Studios. Get the fun while you can, where you can, because the future of any title with those two particular names attached to it is anything but certain. Despite everything I just told you regarding my personal experience, I still had fun. The trials and tribulations of dealing with a community of streamers and their fans happens to be my own experience, but it's not the only experience possible, far from it. Inside this very same social framework, I found some of the best overall moments you'll ever find in gaming, period, becoming possible. And as strange as it sounds, the sheer intensity of how garbage that community turned out to be actually speaks to the game's success. You don't care about things like this when a game is unenjoyable and bad. You don't care about the social aspect if you aren't painfully aware of precisely what type of fun you're missing at the time. And if you take my overall experience, replacing it with an extra few weeks of what I had back at the beginning, I would have a completely, totally different message with a completely different tone. The fact that such things are possible ends up being a mark in the game's favor, if you can believe that. And I'm sure that for every person like me complaining about the idiots in charge of their guild or their alliance or whatever, there's two more just like me who are happy to log in and play a few more hours because they enjoy, respect, and admire their own leadership. In a very strange way, my experience being so negative in some aspects simply proves that there's notably high potential for it to be fantastic for other people, and I think that is the real note that I want to end on. That's it. Before I get flamed in the comment section by a bunch of these mindless streamer fans, I don't care. I'm not going to read it. Instead, I'm going to go back to playing Project Zomboid because for some reason I have an insatiable craving to play that game again. But that's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. Special VPN deal, locals and Patreon, etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice night.